Welcome to LezPod. You are here, my friends, because you believe in the LGBT community and the importance of sharing our individual stories to help impact one another. Our goal with the show is to introduce you to people and ideas that are going to help you actually execute on your dreams and believe in yourself. So we actually have a remarkable guest on the show. My name is Alexandria Friedlander, and I'm here to introduce you to Donna Weinberger today. Donna Weinberger, right? It's Weinberger?
Yeah.
Weinberger. Who is the CEO and founder of Inspire Recovery in West Palm Beach. Help me welcome Donna. You're welcome. Thanks for being on the show. Thanks for coming all the way down from West Palm Beach. Really appreciate that. So tell me a little bit about who you are, what inspired Inspire Recovery, and yeah, let's just start off with that.
Okay. Well, I'll start with what inspired me with Inspire Recovery, and I would say that I had worked with the treatment industry in a different capacity, and what I noticed is that there was not any place for trans people within the treatment system. And so when I started Inspire Recovery was really just to create a safe space for the LGBTQ community to come, and just thinking about myself and what would be comfortable for me and where I would be able to be my authentic self in treatment. I wanted to create that kind of place for the community, and that's pretty much what it is. It's a place where people can come and be their authentic self compared to, let's say, the persona showing up to treatment. And that's what happens a lot of times with our community, is when they go to a treatment center and they're maybe feeling some trauma from the center, and so the person that's going to show up in therapy to do the work, it's not necessarily them.
Right.
So, and I thought that would be great if I had a place like that when I was younger to go to, and to be able to, be free and have affirming therapists who know more than I know and are able to, teach me about the community. And
what got you into, why recovery? Why the recovery industry?
Mm-hmm.
What inspired that, or encouraged that, rather?
Well, when I was much younger, I got sober at a really young age.
How old were you?
19.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
So I was one of those people. I came to Florida and got sober, and I stayed sober, and then I made a life for myself in West Palm Beach and Lake Worth, Palm Beach County area.
Right.
And I wanted to be a therapist, and so I went to school and I did human services, and at the time I was in a 12-step fellowship, and in the fellowship there was just a lot of strong opinions and looking down upon people who wanted to go into the industry of being in therapy and helping other alcoholics and addicts. And so that's kind of like what I heard from the people that were around me, and so I felt ashamed that I wanted to do that. And so instead I then lost all passion, and I took the book. I was going to go to continue for my bachelor's degree.
Right.
And I had no passion left. I didn't care what I did. And I just looked through the book, and I looked through it to find anything that didn't have math, because I didn't want to take any math classes.
I feel you on that. I'm not a mathematician.
Yeah. So I ended up picking communication, and I did that. And towards the end of it, I ended up getting into computer stuff.
Oh, right on.
Tech stuff. And so I was almost at the end of my bachelor's, and I started, talking to my professor about, I want to change my major. And they said, well, just just learn on your own. Go find someone, to teach you. And so I finished my bachelor's, and I never did anything in school of what I necessarily wanted to do, but I did do women's studies, which was great, and I was able to really be introduced to some LGBTQ stuff and feminism stuff, and that was pretty cool. And then I learned everything I could about computers. I ended up going back to school, and funny enough, they said, okay, if you want to take these programming classes, you have to take pre-calculus, and you have to take all these.
Oh shit.
So I had started out in school where they made me, when I first started my AA, I had to take all the basic math classes. And so when I went back and they told me I had to take, pre-calculus, and I hadn't taken any, and I had to take all the math classes to get there, I basically just convinced them. I told them, hey, in high school I took all the classes, through trig. Can you please just let me skip? And they did. They let me skip everything.
Wow, what a good addict you are.
And so I went right into pre-calculus, and I got through that in some,
nice.
interesting ways, and I ended up in the tech industry, and then pretty soon after that I ended up starting a company, and at the time it was called Town Tech.
Okay.
And I, was doing a lot of tech stuff, but then I transferred more into marketing and doing that kind of stuff. And that's how I ended up, ironically, back into working with treatment centers and drug detoxes. And so I had this company. It was called Town Tech for a couple of years, and through that, I met a lot of people, and I ended up starting another company that was like an alternative medicine type company that was online.
Right on.
With a social worker and some other people. And so what happened is one of our investors, we had a bunch of investors, and we had this person who was dating a high profile person, and every time she drank, she would put the information and pictures out to the media. And so It was in his best interest to get her sober. And so she went to a detox, and she introduced me to them. And this is how I ended up in, working with drug detox. And so I started working with Sunrise Detox, and I worked with them for many years. And then I ended up worked with a couple other places and started a new business. And that's when I started to see this issue of trans people being left out of, there's nowhere for them to room. There's there was just no welcoming place, and centers really didn't not necessarily know what to do.
Right.
And so that's when I said, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and start creating, what I saw was the main issue at the time was housing. So I created housing for the community, all gender housing, and then started and opened Inspire Recovery, and then really focused in on working with the trans and queer community and creating this affirming environment, of educated professionals. And now we have, all gender housing, and
Oh wow, that's beautiful. And how does it usually work out? I mean, like, tell us a little about the gender housing. Are people respectful of one another? I mean, it's early recovery. I know when I was in early recovery, I was a mess. I was not considerate of people. I, kind of just did my own thing, and I had to deal with consequences of like people not liking me, people not wanting to be around me, and having to listen to my sponsor and do what she actually said to do to change my ways so that people would want to be around me. So how does that work out with cleanliness? And they say girls are grosser than guys, but I don't know, it's all up in the air, right? How does that work out?
Well, I would say that, since none of that kind of stuff would apply in the sense that, like we don't see a two-gender system. So
Well said.
it's pretty much, we start, we have to see, basically deconstruct gender and, reprogram anyone that comes to work with us on the way they think about gender. And so, although in the beginning, when we first opened, or before we opened, when I was trying to figure it out, how to do housing, and I started asking around and looking in other states, and I couldn't find anything, it's not even really a topic that ever comes up because, the way that it works is just perfect. So, we room people based on energy. And really, what's like more important is just making sure that the clients that come in, that their needs are met. Like if a person has the trauma of gender dysphoria, that they get HRT immediately, because that's the kind of thing that's going to make them feel better and be able to like move forward. As far as how everyone gets along and the cleanliness, they're kind of, a lot of times they could be like, kids, like, high school kids or young kids or all ages, and especially with the trans community, because they're, they start out growing up and, they know their identity, but society starts telling them they're wrong and, you're this other identity that we labeled you. And so that's where like some like developmental stuff starts. So, it's kind of like having people of all ages and at all different places, but there's no relation to like any, there'd be so many different genders, so there's not really, if someone is messy, it would be just their personality type to be messy, or maybe they're paralyzed in some kind of trauma, so they're not able to move, or maybe they've never learned how to clean, so it's just like teaching them how to clean, or maybe their priorities are somewhere else. So it would be like the only difference would be that there's no separation of genders.
Got it. I mean, that would make sense, hence the whole concept of Inspire Recover. So I apologize for that odd question.
Definitely not. It was a hot topic in the beginning.
But just to be honest, then, I mean, I run an LGBTQ podcast, but at the end of the day, I'm not that educated on, everything. I'm not that educated on exactly what queer means, how people identify as queer. A few of my friends are transgender, and I'm understanding of it, but I really haven't educated myself as much as I had hoped to on this show, So from somebody from that honest standpoint, who, I feel kind of ashamed that I haven't self-educated myself that much on it. But I mean, that's the goal of the show, is to help not only myself but other people become knowledgeable about things that you're not, society hasn't recently been accustomed to, right? Yeah. And that's just being a human being, right? I mean, essentially, what does queer mean to you? I mean, I asked this on my last podcast, but I'm just curious, since you run a transgender environment community, like how does that, does it just kind of mean like human being at the end of the day?
Well, I think that queer has several different meanings, because, in one sense you can say queer and it could be talking about the whole community. So it used to be a term that was derogatory, and sometimes some older LGBTQ people are kind of surprised, wow, how come everyone's using this word queer, when it was used against us back in the day. But it was reclaimed, and it's kind of like an umbrella term for the community. But then there's also like genderqueer, like that's how I identify, and that's, that
what
would
does
be
that mean?
more like non-binary sort of.
Okay.
But the way I look at genderqueer is kind of like, for me, I'm sort of like fixed, like if there were a line, and a line is still very limiting. But for me, if there's male on one side and female on the other side, I'm pretty much always in the same place, somewhere in the middle. And some people, you know, might identify gender fluid, and so they might, you know, one day feel more masculine or one day
Feel more feminine. Right.
So that's, you know, that's like genderqueer. So I think that, you know, there's definitely, it would be sort of up to the person how they think of queer, but it's definitely, like I said, it's either this umbrella term for the whole LGBTQ community. So like, you know, like I'm part of a queer community,
Right.
and sometimes that could include allies, that can include, you know, any part of the community, and then, but then there's that identity of being genderqueer, like how I identify, and you know, it's just a little bit different than the broad term.
Got it.
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing that with me. I appreciate that. I'd love to hear about what you were like when you were a kid. I mean, if you got clean and sober when you were 19 years old, tell me who Donna was. You know, like how did you grow up? What kind of was that initiation phase that made you want to start using drugs and get curious about stuff?
Mhm.
And then, you know, how'd you hit bottom?
Well, I think that, you know, my growing up years would probably be my least authentic self years. So, you know, because I did grow up in a place and time where I did not see any LGBTQ people. There was no LGBTQ people in my town. Yeah, so there was no LGBTQ people anywhere around me. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't introduced to me. And that's why I'm so passionate. Like the reason I do Inspire Recovery, and, you know, I started a nonprofit a couple years ago, is literally because I want to create more successful, visible LGBTQ people, so
Yes.
young people don't have to grow up like I did, or much worse, because my upbringing compared to other people's is, you know, it would be amazing compared to some people or some of the clients that come into our center from, you know, like Mississippi and Arkansas and Georgia and Tennessee, or, you know, from a religious family, especially like Baptist families, it's very difficult, or people that have gone through conversion therapy. It's like, there's so much more extremes, but for me, it was just, I didn't know what the issue was. I didn't feel comfortable. I never felt comfortable. I always felt, you know, there was just not any level of comfort. I wasn't comfortable in my home.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't necessarily have a connection with my parents in the way that maybe I could have if I was my authentic self. And just really because of those feelings, I was able to see at a young age how great alcohol made me feel. And, you know, my dream growing up was just to like have a bar in my house and be able to drink as much as I could. And ironically, I got sober at 19 before I had a house of my own, and that never happened. But
So alcohol was your drug of choice.
well, that's definitely where I started, and then, you know, I found other drugs, and by the time I ended up getting sober, I was on a methadone clinic, which is another hot topic today, right?
Yeah.
Suboxone and
Yeah.
Subutex and methadone, and I definitely am here to say that is, you know, how it's being portrayed as a solution. You know, it's certainly not a solution, you know, but
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that.
for me, I actually got on methadone because I wanted to be sober. So just like people get on Suboxone, I wanted to, you know, I didn't want to be physically addicted to a drug. And little did I know that I was going to end up being even more physically addictive, and it was going to be a whole different ballgame of actually getting sober. But, you know, I was told that this is a way, you know, and I did that, and so.
Can you describe, because I don't know if many, I mean, I don't have like a recovery audience. I've got, you know, a lesbian audience. So
Yeah.
can you give some insight as to what it's like to detox from methadone?
Yeah, it's terrible. It's not, you know, it's kind of like another opiate, like let's say heroin,
Right.
of a 3-day withdrawal would be a walk in the park compared to detoxing off something like methadone or some of these new drugs today that now take even longer. When I talk to people, they say it's like 3 months until they're through. For me, it was a couple weeks, and it was not, it was just hell.
Yeah.
It wasn't enjoyable.
Like climbing out of your skin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, climbing out of my skin. I remember I'd hit my head against the wall. There was nothing fun about it, and it was that really stuck with me. Where I just never wanted to be in that situation ever again. And at that time, there were clinics where you had to go to, so I was also like stuck going to a clinic every day.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'll never be able to travel, or have a life. And so even when I came down here to go to another rehab, I thought this is probably the last time I'll ever fly. And little did I know my life was about to start. So, I would say that like being part of the LGBTQ community and not knowing what I was or who I was or knowing anything about identity or sexual orientation, I easily turned to drugs and alcohol. Just makes perfect sense because I didn't feel comfortable. Now I can actually, you see I'm socially awkward, so like imagine what drugs
I don't think you're
and alcohol
socially awkward.
I'm definitely a bit socially awkward, so it's like it's a great solution in every aspect except when it turns, and then it's not anymore.
Right.
And so maybe had I seen other people like myself and had a support group and had friends, it would have been a different situation. So I think that, and for me, what's interesting is that when I did come out and when I did finally understand who I was, it wasn't even exact either. So, I only learned about sexual orientation. So I learned about, basically lesbian people and,
Bisexual.
heterosexual.
And heterosexual.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that was how I came out, as a lesbian person.
Right.
But it didn't really reflect the fact that, I wanted short hair and of course that's expression, so that would be more like gender expression, so it's not even necessarily related to gender identity. But for me, it was because people, like everyone with different gender identities might value expression, or might not. But so, for me, I realized later on, and really as I came into doing Inspire Recovery, I got to understand a lot more about gender and see that like my primary situation was not my sexual orientation, it was more like my gender identity. And so, I think that's where I felt the most uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And like when I was, and then when I came out as a lesbian, I cut my hair, I did all these things that, you think like stereotypically lesbians do, but really is it who you're attracted to, or is it your gender? For me, I've come to realize it has to do with gender, and that makes the most sense. But for people, especially older people, the only thing that people knew is like, oh, maybe like a butch lesbian, like is right. Had they had a person who says like I'm a butch lesbian, maybe if they understood gender, that they might see like, okay, well but maybe they are, because everybody identifies whatever differently works for them. Right. So, and that's a lot of the stuff we do too at Inspire Recovery, is like doing like gender identity treatment plans and helping people, because oftentimes people come to us and they might be questioning and not really knowing. Yeah. We have plenty of people, I'd say more people that come, saying I'm a lesbian person, that actually learn about gender and start HRT and end up coming out as trans guys. So that happens pretty often for us.
And what does HRT stand for?
That would be hormone replacement therapy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's like, that is one of the most important important, like, life-saving medical interventions for trans people and some queer people. And again, it just depends on if that's what someone desires. But like some of the big issues is just not feeling congruent. So for a trans person, you know, once a person gets on HRT, like let's say someone comes to our center and they have all these diagnoses, and typically, like, let's say a kid starts going to a therapist or a psychiatrist, or even an adult goes later on in their life, or, you know, a teenager, most therapists or psychiatrists are not going to say, you know, explore gender identity.
Right.
They're not going to explore, like, there's, in the DSM-5, there's gender dysphoria, but the description of it doesn't really match anything about what the trauma of gender dysphoria looks like. And really it looks like all these different mental health diagnoses. So, which, you know, when people come into the center, they might appear to be schizoaffective, or appear to be in a psychosis, or appear to be on the autism spectrum, and, you know, appear to be borderline and bipolar, and just goes on and on. And
right.
then, you know, but really it's just, is it just symptoms of the trauma of gender dysphoria? And so let's, you know.
Or the drugs, right?
It's similar to, a person getting sober and diagnosing someone within, you know, a short time period. Of course they're going to seemingly have all these diagnoses. So,
yeah.
You know, we just look at everything through a trauma-informed lens and help our clients through medical interventions, social interventions, and by doing that, the symptoms lessen. And those diagnosed that maybe they're not in a psychosis anymore, maybe they're not hallucinating anymore, maybe, you know, they're all of a sudden they're not seemingly on the autism spectrum.
Right.
Obviously, it would take a while for, you know, that label to leave them.
Yes.
But that's pretty much what we find is that, you know, so HRT is medically one of the, you know, first things that we would do for someone who is desiring HRT, and that, you know, and then just from that alone, besides just being in a peer-based community where their experience is normalized and everyone around them is part of the community, HRT is really is life-saving, and really can start a person on a path where someone is not able to be their authentic self, because like they're sitting there, you know, thinking, how can I get my HRT? What can I tell this person to get my HRT in Florida? How can I get HRT? It's, you know, it's really helpful for kids if they're able to start before puberty, because then they don't have to go, like, just imagine going through puberty as, you know, in the wrong body.
Right.
When you can, so like that's super life-saving. So it's really, it's a great intervention.
What is the legacy that you kind of want to leave behind?
Well, you know, also in addition to Inspire Recovery, we have the nonprofit Transpire Help,
Okay.
which helps with funding for housing and for medicine and healthcare. So
Very nice.
that's, you know, that's something that we're growing, and we may hopefully be a part of the Southeast Florida Behavioral Health Network soon, which would be real helpful.
That would be freaking awesome.
And then we actually just had our second annual Pride on the Block in West Palm Beach. We never had a Pride before in West Palm.
That's
so
true.
We just raised some money having, you know, this event, and we're gonna have it next year. We're gonna start planning now, and that's gonna be amazing. Just, you know, leaving behind, you know, a Pride in West Palm Beach. Like,
Yeah.
That's gonna be cool. But more than anything, you know, like, we do a ton of education, and we educate treatment centers and hospitals, and really anyone that wants to become educated. And so it's always my number one goal to create more successful, visible people in the community for youth, because the more we do that, and I believe we 100% do that, and, you know, we also, like, in our small town, we're creating a community. You know, people come and they stay, and, businesses are now, more familiar with the trans and queer community because there's just more people, within the community that are visible, that are coming, are able to really be a part of the community. And so to be able to do that not only in West Palm Beach but in other areas, so that it's not something that people have a lack of understanding.
Right.
Like a legacy would be to create a society where everyone has trans friends and trans family, and like kids growing up aren't told what identity they are, and people have queer friends and non-binary friends, and really just a society where gender has no relation to body parts, and and it's not something that someone tells you what it is. So I would say that and the same thing goes for sexual orientation, like to where just leaving behind as many successful, visible people that can be there as mirrors to the youth, and educating as much as possible to any person or business or institution that wants to be educated and learn how to be an ally, and learn how to create a space for people of to be able to be who they are.
Right.
And so that would really be the number one thing, because it would save a ton of lives.
Yeah.
It would save a ton of misery and attempted suicides, and it would definitely stop a lot of the misdiagnoses of all the mental health stuff. It's like if someone gets to just grow up and be who they are because they see on TV, in the local shopping, Publix, and maybe their parents, or maybe their parents' friends, or maybe their cousins, they don't see this two-gender system,
Right.
So I think that would be the best thing that I could do is, to number one, like grow this organization so it can really continue to help, and then, help as many people that have already become addicted, and, just keep on doing the same thing, like, creating as many communities with more successful, visible LGBTQ folks.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. And life-changing.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming on LezPod. I really appreciate it. Tell us, again, the name of your nonprofit so people can check it out.
That's Transpire Help. It's Transpire Help. Not
Help.
health, not health, but help.
Help.
Help me. So transpirehelp.org.
Okay, awesome.
And then the for-profit is Inspire Recovery.
Awesome. Guys, be sure to check it out. Check it out. Well, thank you, Donna.